All right, so ready for some seriously creepy short horror stories. We're diving into 5 of them, the kind that'll make you double-check the locks and maybe sleep with the lights on. But before we get lost in the chills, let's bring in our expert on all things eerie.
Well, you know what gets me about these stories is how they can pack so much fear into so few words. You know, like a concentrated dose of terror. We're talking about those primal fears, isolation, the uncanny, the fear of the unknown, all hitting you right in the gut.
Yeah, and they stick with you too. Okay, so let's jump right into it with Who's in My Bed? I mean, this one is just brutal. Even though it's super short, it's like, Dad's checking under his son's bed, right? A pretty universal experience. Most of us did that as kids.
Exactly.
But instead of finding dust bunnies or that lost toy, he finds his real son huddled under there, totally terrified. Ugh. See, that's playing on the imposter fear, like the idea that something you trust, something familiar, has been replaced by something sinister. And it's even creepier because it's tied to that routine, that bedtime ritual of checking for monsters. It's like, what happens when the monster is already there, you know?
And you don't even know who it is. Chills, man, chills. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Go from under the bed to the middle of nowhere with a cabin. We've got a lost hiker, classic horror setup, stumbles upon this creepy cabin, seems abandoned. Of course, he goes inside.
Never a good idea.
Right. And get this. The walls are covered, not with wallpaper, but with portraits, and they're all of smiling people.
Okay, now that's where the story starts messing with your head. The smiling faces, something we usually see as welcoming, friendly. It becomes unsettling, even sinister in this context. It's like you can't shake the feeling that you're being watched, judged, but you don't know why. It's like the whole atmosphere is off. Totally. So this hiker, he's not having the best judgment, decides to take a nap in this creepy cabin surrounded by these smiling strangers in the portraits. And well, you can probably guess, things don't go so well when he wakes up. The portraits are gone, replaced by windows. Someone or something was watching him while he slept. And they knew he was watching back.
And that's the brilliance of that twist. It's not just about being watched. It's the fact that those seemingly harmless paintings were hiding something much more sinister. A window, something so ordinary, becomes terrifying because of what it represents.
Oh, for sure. It's like that feeling when you're walking alone at night and you realize someone's been following you. But in this case, it could be anything.
Exactly. It taps into that primal fear of the unseen observer,
Yeah.
the lurking entity that's always just out of sight. And that fear is powerful because it's rooted in our survival instincts, the fear of the predator, the fear of the unknown, amplified by the isolation of the wilderness.
Okay, yeah, that image of the windows where the portraits were, that's gonna stick with me. Let's move on from the wilderness, but we're still in for a creepy ride with the red wristband. This one, it messed with my head, and trust me, I've seen a lot of horror.
Hospitals are already prime locations for horror, right? I mean, they represent vulnerability, that thin line between life and death.
No arguments there. And this story, it really digs into that fear. We've got a doctor, sees a patient in the hallway, nothing out of the ordinary, right? Except this patient has a red wristband on. And in this hospital, red means deceased. The doctor's freaking out, understandably so, but before he can even process it, the patient turns to him, smiles, and what does she do? Lifts up her wrist, and there's a matching red band.
That's classic justice. But it's so effective because it completely subverts your expectations. You expect the doctor, the authority figure in this situation, to be safe, to be in control. But this story reminds us that even in a place of healing, death is always present.
And that red band, I mean, talk about a symbol hitting you right there. You go to a hospital for help, for healing, and that color, usually associated with life, vitality, it becomes a symbol of death. Just chilling.
It really gets under your skin.
Okay.
So from unsettling hospitals, let's talk about white with red. This story, it's like a masterclass in suspense, even though it's super short. It all revolves around that idea of the forbidden, right? Like whatever you do, don't look in there. We're wired to be curious.
Oh yeah, tell me not to do something, and it's the first thing I want to do. So we've got this guy, new apartment, and there's that one apartment next door, the one he's been warned about, told not to look inside. But curiosity gets the better of him, and of course he ends up peeking through the keyhole.
What could go wrong? Right?
Exactly. So the first time he looks, he sees a woman, really pale, with long black hair, just standing there in this dimly lit room. Creepy, definitely, but then it gets worse.
Yeah.
The second time he looks, all he sees is red, just dot red. What does that even mean? I have no idea, but it's terrifying. What are your thoughts on that, expert? What do you think happened?
Well, that's the genius of the story, right?
Yeah.
doesn't spell it out for you. It just gives you those two images and lets your imagination run wild. And let's be honest, what we imagine is usually way scarier than anything a writer could actually describe.
Oh, absolutely. My mind went straight to blood, violence, something truly gruesome. It's the unseen horror that gets under your skin the most, I think.
100%. And that's where the color red becomes so powerful in this story. It's not just blood, it's danger, a warning, a sign that something is deeply, terribly wrong. The story never actually tells us what happened, but that red, that's all we need to know.
It's like the monster in the shadows, you know? We're hardwired to fear what we can't see, what we can only imagine. And sometimes our imaginations are our own worst enemies. Okay, for our final story, let's go back to something familiar, the comfort of home, but with a terrifying twist. A Mother's Call. This one really got to me because it plays on that fear of something invading our safe spaces. Like, if our homes aren't safe, what is right?
It's true. Our homes are supposed to be our sanctuaries, the one place where we feel completely secure. And when that sense of security is shattered, it's incredibly unsettling.
Absolutely. This story starts off simple enough. A young girl hears her mother calling her down for dinner. She starts to go downstairs, but then her real mother, not the one calling, grabs her, and she's terrified. She says, "I heard it too." And that's when it hits you. Who was calling the girl's name? Who else could it have been?
It taps into that primal fear of the unknown entity, the unseen force that can manipulate our environment, our senses. It's the idea that even in the most familiar of places, we are not truly in control. There are things out there, things we can't explain, that can mimic, deceive, and ultimately terrify us.
And that's what gets me about this story. It's not some monster in the closet. It's something that can sound like your own mother, something that can get inside your head, inside your home.
It really gets under your skin, that fear of the unknown, the idea that something can mess with your senses, make you question what's real. And it makes you think, maybe we're never truly safe, even in our own homes.
Makes you want to sleep with the lights on, that's for sure. It's funny, what I love about these stories, all 5 of them, is how they stick with you long after you've finished reading them. Like, they get under your skin and just stay there.
That's the power of shared horror, right? It's like a perfectly crafted little nightmare, just enough to spark your imagination.
It's like you're tapping into something primal, something deep down in our collective unconscious,
Absolutely. They remind us that we're all vulnerable, that there are forces out there, things we may not be able to explain or control.
And sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we create in our own minds, right? Fueled by those primal fears.
Exactly. So next time you hear a noise in the night, or you think you hear someone calling your name, just remember these stories and think about what might be lurking just beyond your perception.
Well, on that terrifying note, that wraps up our deep dive into these 5 scary stories. We've covered some ground tonight, from those primal fears to uncanny encounters to the just plain unsettling power of the unknown.
And remember, a little fear can be a good thing. It can keep us safe, alert us to danger, but don't let it control you.
Embrace the thrill of a good scare, right?
Absolute.
And remember, there's always a light switch somewhere if you need it.
Until next time, sleep tight.
And don't let the bed bugs bite.